So today the Oxygen team brings us 4 new composite elements, which are essentially the dynamic system, kind of like a design set that Oxygen uses to push custom elements to us. Most of the composite elements are code blocks wrapped in, Oxygen elements to make some functionality work, but I wanted to show these to you so that you can decide if the composite elements are worth it to you. So today, just briefly, what we're going to look at is the Breadcrumbs element. There is this little slider right here, and as you can see, it stops on hover, which can very easily be changed. There's this cool kind of tab accordion system which fetches your latest posts using a repeater. And then we have a video element, and I actually need to change the page real quick to show you that. So here is the video list element. So I actually already changed this to be dynamic using an ACF repeater on this page. So if I jump into the back end of this page, I've created a very simple repeater. I simply add the links to the video. You can see it works for both the short URL and the full URL. And then I created a simple little title field, and that is what is actually pulling into this element. So if I click through them, you can see it change. I messed up something on these active icon elements, but that's okay. I'll worry about that later. So these elements are pretty cool. What I want to do is give you a peek behind the scenes on how they actually work, and then we'll continue from there. So like I mentioned, most of these elements are code blocks that complement Oxygen elements. So that is pretty much essentially what the Breadcrumbs element is. So if we take a look at this, it's of course just a code block. And what it's doing is basically fetching the roots and the children links of that stuff for you. So you really don't need to worry about any of this down here. What you can focus on is the actual configuration options up here. Now I've done a little bit of configuration just to try to play with it a bit, and you can change your delimiter to pretty much anything you want. So this arrow is not there by default. If you wanted, it could be a comma, it could be, vertical line, it could be whatever you want. You could even type something in there. But if we just do like a double arrow, apply that code, it's really small. If I collapse this editor, then you can see there's a double arrow. I could just simply change it like that, and voila. This other option right here, show root, is actually set to true by default. And what that does is it essentially just shows the root of your website. And you can see mine says blog, which is actually my homepage on this site. So what you could do is change that root title to just something like home instead of blog. In my site, I actually have the homepage set. It's just a WordPress thing that it calls it blog by default. So you can very easily change that as well. Now for our disable link functionality right here, you can make it prevent these links from being clickable for however many levels you want. So if I set this to 0, then essentially it's going to make the About Us link here not clickable. Not exactly sure what you might want to use that for, but it is there for you if you want it to work that way. So there we go. I am actually just going to leave that as is, so I'll just click on apply and we'll be good to go there. Now the other option you have is some CSS, so if you want to change the styling of that, you are going to need to use CSS or add those selectors into Oxygen. I would probably just recommend going the CSS route. It's going to be relatively straightforward. So I'll just go ahead and quickly show you how you can style these links. So your selector is going to be oxyl-breadcrumb li. Did I spell that correctly? Yes. Okay. And then you can do whatever you want. So font size, if you wanted to make it 24 pixels. And if you wanted to change the color of these, you're going to just simply use, whatever you want. If you wanted to make it like a light gray. However, of course, because the other ones are A links, they're not going to change. So you need to go .oxyl-breadcrumb lia like that. And then your color can be whatever you want for those A links. So I just changed it to the atomic green instead of the default blue links. And there you go. So that's nice and simple. Just take some basic CSS for that. Apply that code and you're good to go. Okay, so we'll save this and take a look at the front end on that slider. So as you can see on the front end, this slider does move. It's a little bit slow, so you might want to change the pace, and you also might want to make it so when you hover, it doesn't stop scrolling. Now that is super easy because again, these are more or less just code blocks with some complementary Oxygen elements. So in our CSS here, this is primarily CSS, this element. You can change the animation speed. So maybe we could crank it down to 15 seconds. And then the other thing you want to look for right here is this selector. So animation play state. You can see it's set to paused, and that's when we hover over the slider element. So you could just simply comment this out instead of, fully deleting it. So we'll just do that. Comment out that selector, save this. And if we go refresh on the front end, then not only should the slider move faster, which it definitely does, but when we hover over it, you can see it no longer stops. So that's totally a preference thing, really easy changes to make. And as you can see, these are just simple Oxygen images. So you can grab anything you want out of your media library and it will change it for you there. Now these containers are actually set to a width of 20% on this class right here. So you could change this to, automatic or Oxy Ninja grid classes if you wanted. And from my basic testing, you don't actually need 2 rows. You can see that the rows end up in line with each other, so you don't really need 2 rows, but if you set everything to 20% width, then in the Oxygen editor, it can get really scrunched. However, you could add as many of these as you wanted, and it will work perfectly fine. We'll just go ahead and change some of these images real quick. So let's choose whatever that is. It looks like some food. And then we'll choose this picture of the people on the paddleboard or boat or whatever that thing is. If we refresh, there is our 3rd row with our little food and our people on the paddleboard. So as you can see, you could just keep adding rows if you want to, or you could stick everything in one giant row and just deal with what it looks like on the back end. So this one's pretty simple. Logo sliders are definitely pretty common, especially for people trying to showcase portfolios. So that one is a handy element to have. This image accordion one is pretty cool. So if you look at this, the image accordion itself is actually just a repeater, and it's just doing a very simple query. So it's going to fetch your posts, going to find the most recent 5, and not load any more than those recent 5. Then what we have is an image here. This is just pulling in the featured image of that post. Then we have some item details, which is just the icon and the text link. The text link is just the permalink of the post, as you can see right here. And then the title of the text link is automatically just the title of the post. So if you don't have any posts on your site and you add this, it's probably going to look pretty wonky because of course there'll be nothing there. So just make sure you either change the query to your custom post type or, go ahead and add some posts. So this one is really simple. Changing this code is going to be pretty complex because you can see there's some JavaScript going on here, and there's also a bunch of CSS. None of this stuff is overly complex, but it's definitely going to take you a little bit of time to tweak this if you want to make changes, but otherwise it's totally functional right out of the box. Taking a look on the front end, again, this is just simply what happens. It doesn't do anything until I actually click the image, but it does move between our posts. It shows and hides the text element. And of course you could change that icon to be whatever you want. It doesn't actually have to be a camera. So that one is pretty cool. That would be nice for like a hero section maybe, or just a different kind of slider for your posts. Okay, so last but not least, we have the video list element, which is very similar, like I already mentioned, to the one that you've probably seen on the Oxygen documentation on their website. So what this element does is, using some JavaScript, it's going to pull in the portions of the URL that it needs for you automatically and switch that on the video player on the left-hand side here. So on the left is actually a video element that is just pulling in the dynamic data from my repeater field. By default, this does have a hard-coded URL for the YouTube video on it. So I'll show you what I did to fix that in just a second. On the right-hand side, I just have a repeater. The query is the video list repeater that I created and showed you already, which is this one here in the back end. So very simple repeater, just has a URL and the video title. I used dynamic data to pull in the title here. And then this container itself is actually a link wrapper, and its URL is the one that I'm pulling in from the repeater using dynamic data here. Now again, the video element on the left-hand side here is not tied into this repeater. So what I did was actually use dynamic data to pull in the first line of my repeater. So even if I reorganize them, it switches on the left-hand side. And all I did was go to dynamic data, meta/custom field, and I scrolled all the way down to my video list repeater, which is the name of my repeater, and I have repeater 0 video URL. That is essentially the first row of my repeater. So no matter how that organization changes, that's the one that it's going to pull in. Now again, keep in mind that this video element is outside of my repeater, which is why you have to do it that way. But there you go, it is now dynamic. Like I already mentioned, I did something to break the way that these icons change, but I probably wouldn't use that. I would find some other indicator, maybe like an underline or a background color or something like that. But all I did was basically steal the classes off of that other element. So you can see if I look at this div, it has the video list item left class. Each of these icons have the same classes from the actual composite element. Same thing on this heading. I have the list item title, and then on the actual link wrapper itself, there's 2 different classes. So as long as you make sure that you have all of these same classes, then the code block that I showed you before that actually makes this element function will just, magically make everything else work for you. So with that, those are the 4 new elements that the Oxygen team has brought us via their composite element system. So of course we have the breadcrumbs, logo slider, we have this thing, whatever this is called, and then we have the video list element. Let me know down in the comments below what you think of these elements and also what you'd like to see in the future. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in a future video.